Welcome to Worldbuild with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listener. My name is Rob Hilferty. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Christopher Prunty.
Hello.
Gentlemen, always good to have you by. On today's episode, we are sitting down with author Dev Jannerson, and we're going to cut to that now. Hello, and we are joined today by Dev Jannerson. Deb, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Deb, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those of us who might not know you very well?
Sure. Well, I'm an author. These days, I mostly write YA, although I've also written a lot of poetry and social commentary. I had a number of viral articles for Bitch magazine in the early 2000s, and then I went on to be published in various literary journals and get a pushcart nomination and also several awards before finally publishing 2 poetry books and then one young adult book with the queer indie press 9 Star. And that is my most recent book. It's called The Women of Dauphine. It came out in June of last year. And it takes place in the 1990s in New Orleans, and it's about queer girls and ghosts.
Yeah, so speaking about The Women of Dauphine, one of the things I wanted to ask about, which I really kind of noticed it as flavor sprinkled between the whole novel, is the lost children. I was curious, what's the inspiration for that? What basis does it have in reality? And what were you trying to do with those lost children? Because I see them popping up everywhere.
Right. Well, for context, the lost children is a phrase that doesn't appear to be so popular anymore. Now people mostly refer to them rather unkindly just as gutter punks, but in the 90s, the lost children were the teenage runaways in New Orleans who you would just catch glimpses of hanging about in public places.
They kind of had like this almost effect of having little ghosts throughout the story, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, as far as my protagonist Cassie's parents are concerned, the lost children are a threat because, they bring up the fear of homelessness and poverty, which Cassie's parents are also trying to run from. Cassie finds them interesting, but also exercises caution.
And for our listeners' kind of background, Cassie is the protagonist who stumbles upon a ghost who's living in her new home, and they kind of develop a relationship over time. A follow-up question there, especially about the two of them working together as characters. What I thought was really compelling in this book is how deep you kind of get into their psychology and how much we see them change over the course of the book. From a world building perspective, like what does it take to get into their heads? And from what I understand, you wrote a first draft for this a couple of weeks, which is kind of insane. So how much of those characters were like that when you did that first draft, and how much did they change by the time, this got picked up and then, was published?
Oh, that is a good question. I will say, when I first was brainstorming for the book before I actually started writing, I thought that maybe Jem would become increasingly toxic, but then the more I thought about it, that wasn't the story I wanted to tell. I wanted to talk about how like a relationship can survive every awful thing and then still eventually not be what those people need. I also, I cared a lot about getting into the psychology of the fact that Jem is sort of older, but sort of not. Jem is the ghost. She is forever 15. She's been dead for more than 20 years by the time Cassie meets her. But the thing is, she's been trapped in the house the whole time. So is she older, or is she forever stunted because she can't go new places and make new experiences? And, nothing against it, but a thought I always had in the paranormal romance genre, was why are we not talking about the age difference,
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right, it's
he
something
and
I noticed.
Angel are 600 years apart. He's kind of forever young, so maybe it's okay, but shouldn't they at least talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one of the first things I knew about this story, was that I really wanted them to talk about it and struggle with whether it was okay.
That is actually a really interesting kind of subject to broach, and I think that it's really pervasive in a lot of the kind of supernatural romance that you were talking about. Uh, what did you really want to explore with that question? Like, was it just the difficulties, or what else was there for you?
Well, Jem is worried that it would be unethical for them to be romantically involved because she has been around longer. And that was something that was also important to me because in a lot of these stories, the vampire or werewolf or whatever is the aggressor. And I wanted to really push against that. And what's so cool about ghosts is they can be so many different things. I hadn't, at the time I started writing this book, ever seen a queer ghost story. I have since.
Yes, you were saying about how, in some ways, she's a ghost. She's stuck at 15. At any point, do you ever touch on the fact of like how trauma or anything can trap you at a certain age of when it happens? And there's nothing really as traumatic as, well, dying.
Yeah, I mean, trauma comes up again and again in the book and in really a lot of things that I write. So I think that it could be taken as a pretty strong metaphor because in some ways, she is stuck at the worst part of her life and the world's moving on without her.
Speaking of trauma, one of the things we talk about too in role playing, to cover a lot of role playing games and fantasy. How do you so in terms of those two things, a lot of the times we use role playing as a way, or fantasy as a way, to either escape our trauma rather than confront it. And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot in role playing is it can be a way to confront it. What do you think about that in terms of fantasy in writing? Like, how do you see fantasy as a way to interact with trauma?
Also a good question. Let's see. I mean, I think it's as valid a way to deal with it as any. I don't necessarily see fantasy as an escape. I think that what makes genre fiction really good is how much it has to do with our lives, despite often not even being set in the same universe.
Yeah, so I was wondering, because it seems like when I was reading other interviews you've had, you viewed it as a way of interacting with the trauma or confronting it rather than just avoiding or not talking about it or burying it. And so I wondered,
Right.
like, I want you to expand on that more, only because I feel like in role playing we have an opportunity to do the same thing, because we're creating the story as we go almost.
And you're creating your own narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I often feel that fantasy and the supernatural in general allows us to create a separation enough where we allow ourselves to feel comfortable with it. There's a fantastical element where we can kind of deny the reality of trauma in a certain way, and that makes us feel more okay with confronting it, because in a certain sense there's a disassociation with the absolutely traumatic event that you're experiencing, but you're
Mm.
also allowing yourself to create distance because you can look at it and say, oh well, this is a fantastical element, this is a ghost, so there's some safety in it. There's something that's less abrasive than if it were just something like a something that is purely nonfiction, or at least purely something that's more grounded in reality. Although grounded in reality, I feel like that's a loaded term in and of itself, but
Mm.
that's neither here nor there.
Well, I mean, I do think that I process everything that happens by writing about it, and also that, at least for me, like whatever I need to address will start showing up in my writing. Yeah, I do think that exploring these things through fiction is a very safe and valid way to do it, because sometimes it's easier to care about things that have happened to ourselves by putting them on these fictional characters that we can have empathy for. Books let you inside the character's head oftentimes, which is really cool, because we get to experience as them.
I think that one of the strongest things that books do is allow for the creation of empathy. I don't know what it's like to see myself or, see others in another way, but when I read a book, I feel like I can at least get a glimpse of what it might be like. It's something that you have to be wary of, obviously, because you don't want to take that for granted, but it's also one of those things that I think makes you a kinder person, or at least someone who's more curious about the world and other viewpoints, anyway.
Absolutely.
I do have a question about, kind of your location, because one of the things I always find really fascinating is just exactly how your surroundings influence your work and your writing. You're currently located in New Orleans. Obviously, there's all sorts of good and bad spirits down there, and I mean it's just such a storied city. How much do you think New Orleans has really influenced your writing or your world building, or even just you as a person when it comes to your books?
Oh, well, that's a story. I was not originally from New Orleans. I moved out here by myself when I was 18, and then I left to go to school, and then I came back. And as soon as I got here, I just felt like the world had just cracked open, because I saw, there are a lot of dark sides to New Orleans, but it was alive in a way I had never experienced before. And it had laissez le bon temps brûler, let the good times roll. People here are just very focused on feeling good, which when I was growing up in a rather conservative, pseudo Calvinist kind of church, like feeling good was the enemy. And so to see people celebrating that was really incredible for me. And I knew that there was something here I had to find.
So New Orleans, in a way, was a way for you to kind of find a bit of freedom and embrace that freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And it's funny because my character, ultimately has to leave the New Orleans area to get away from her past. But, we all have a different story. I left and then came back. So.
Yeah, this is just a generally vague question, but what is your thoughts on the paranormal in general, of belief and such of that?
Oh, well, I do not believe in ghosts. Do I know they don't exist? No. Because none of us really know anything. I do think, like I was saying, the concept of ghosts is one of the most intriguing paranormal concepts, because they are us, but they are not us. They are us, but they've experienced something that no living human has.
Mm.
And also, in the book, that's sort of a source of frustration for Jem, because she is still essentially a kid, and you would hope if you died you would get some sort of great wisdom or insight into what else is out there besides human life, but she really doesn't have it. She's just stuck, and that's very frustrating for her, and I think would definitely be the worst part for me too, if tomorrow I was dead but couldn't leave a small radius.
Yeah, when I was at the point in the I don't want to give away for those who haven't read the book, but there's a point in the novel where I felt a great deep despair that there wouldn't be a happy ending that a kind of a romance typically promises. But there's a turnaround, I think, where that gets accomplished. But I feel like that despair was definitely accomplished by having the little square radius of the house that she can't leave. So that really hits home, I think, when you say that.
Yes, because Cassie's ghost love is in that house, but so are her parents.
Mm-hmm. And they're
Who,
awful.
yeah.
Unrelentingly awful.
Yeah, well, another thing is I really love stories about relationships that don't necessarily end with happy ever after. Like, hope is very important for me. A sense of hope, a sense of, you know, chapters ending, new things on the horizon. So I always wanted to end on an up note, but I was interested in exploring how a relationship could be great but still not be forever.
Follow-up question on they were called the Chose group that basically takes the protagonist in and attempts various electroshock therapies on her. Did you have any basis in reality for them? Were they modeled after any particular group, or just the concept of like that false kind of therapy?
They were modeled after a number of ex-gay groups, which I don't think the book is too subtle about. But yeah, just the sort of intolerance and like Machiavellian thinking that those groups display was always very scary to me. I never had to be part of an ex-gay group myself because I was not out in high school, but I have friends who did. I love people who did, and I think we're finally seeing some turnaround now with the different states passing laws about it, but what they've gotten away with doing in the name of religion and science is awful. So I did do a lot of reading about the ex-gay groups in the building of the Chose People compound.
Yeah, one thing I did want to kind of bring up is uh, I feel like the YA kind of subgenre is really on the forefront of like asking these tough questions and really pushing, progressive ideals and whatnot. How do you feel about that writing? As I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call you a YA writer, but you've written in the subgenre before. Do you feel like there's some more freedom there for you? Do you feel like there's more responsibility there for you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that YA is great and versatile, and I think all of these genre lines can get pretty permeable. But YA in particular, I think, is just not afraid to ask the big questions because there's less of an expectation that the person already has everything figured out.
Hmm.
I think YA has this opportunity to push back against the ways that we're told we need to conform in our adolescence because all these teenagers are asking why, and the older people don't really have reasons beyond this is the way it's always been. So I do think that asking like the very deep, basic life questions is something that YA does extremely well, especially because a lot of teenagers are not yet distracted by working full time to survive.
Yeah.
Some of them are, but when you're an adult, there are a lot of feelings you just sort of get used to or like learn to ignore for a while. Whereas with teenagers, those emotions are just front and center.
Yeah, I often feel like there's a real punk rock vibe to a lot of the YA stuff that's coming out right now. Almost like, in a lot of senses, they were like those artists and those writers were told, hey, this is the canon that you have to read in order for you to be taken seriously. And then they read those books or they read part of them and they were left with completely unsatisfying answers and whatnot. And I just feel like it's a real kind of countercultural movement, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah, and it's always been steeped in controversy because adults don't want to believe that younger people are dealing with the things that they're often already dealing with. There are a lot of really exciting things happening in YA. It's more diverse than it's ever been. And yeah, I can definitely drop a few recommendations if y'all are into that.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, one book that recently came out, it's a bisexual high school rom-com called You Should See Me in a Crown. It stars a bi Black protagonist who is super sharp and super funny, and it is by Leah Johnson. Okay, another one. This one is a little older, but I just finished it and I was blown away. Is The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith, which is dark YA contemporary, which is 100% my bag. Even though Dauphine was paranormal, I would say that for the most part, the YA I write is dark contemporary. And it's about a young girl, and it covers all 4 of her years in high school after something unexpected and terrible happens to her, and how she tries to just pick up and keep going with her life. And just in terms of character growth, that was just amazing because it covers 4 years and you see her change by change.
Those are some great recommendations. Thank you so much. I'm excited.
Yeah. On the subject of YA, you wrote, "Sometimes I can't help feeling like we're all children who were handed car keys one day and told we were no longer allowed to admit how clueless we all are." Thinking about that statement there, for new writers who are trying to enter the YA scene and write in all those genres you were talking about, what are some pitfalls that they should avoid, and what are you hoping that new that new writers would tackle? What topics?
Well, I do think that we are all basically children, and just it stopped becoming acceptable at some point to admit that we weren't really in control, because the older I get, the more I expect to know everything. And while I do think I know more, I never feel like I'm any less at sea. Like, especially as a person who has lived through some pretty bad trauma, I just go moment to moment sometimes, But the thing is, it's okay for kids to be emotionally messy and confused and upset, or at least it should be. Whereas when adults do it, they get pathologized or just ignored.
And then you, of course, get the terrible refrain of "just get over it" or "just grow up,"
Yeah.
which, of course, is, especially to those who've experienced trauma, is oh so infuriating and so upsetting.
Have you tried being happy?
Yeah.
I don't get it. Why haven't you just tried being happy?
Yeah, as oh man, yeah, we're hitting some deep bones here with Elizabeth and Chris. Many a conversation sitting down with my otherwise very normal family and just asking me, "Hey, why don't you just not think about those things?" And it's like, oh yeah, I just never thought about that. I'm going to go write my journal.
My
for
God,
20
you're
pages.
right.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I do find that, like, something about writing in particular allows for the exploration of trauma that I find so appealing. And I think that what I find so admirable about works like yours is the idea that you don't talk down to children and you don't talk down to teenagers, because of course they're in a lot of ways they're a lot wiser than people give them credit for. And they're still experiencing those same feelings that a lot of people, adults even, can't cope with and can't really process. So I find writing like yours to be really fascinating, and frankly something that I kind of wish I had when I was younger. I when I was younger, it was mostly pure escapist fantasy that I was interested in, but something that would have forced me to confront something I think would have helped a lot more in terms of processing. So I find work like yours to be really, really cool, frankly, like, and really brave and necessary when it comes to helping people process and discover things about themselves they wouldn't have otherwise known.
Well, thanks. Yeah, the heavy themes always seem to pop up in my stuff, even though I originally conceived of the Women of Dauphine as just a light romance. It quickly became something else.
Understandably, I mean, you're dealing with themes of identity and grief and trauma, and very similarly, I can't write something without it being incredibly deep or dark in some way. And I don't mean like Philistine deep, where I'm like super up my own ass. Trust me, I've done that too. But also, it's just a matter of like, I find the exploration of the self through the work to be what I'm there for. Like I could watch a movie, or I could, watch a TV series if I really only wanted to be entertained. But if I wanted to really ask the tough questions, I find that lit in particular helps me deal with that. And writing in particular helps me get really close to that without actually confronting it directly in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It shows a path.
Yeah, movies and TV can be very deep and good, but I definitely more often find that with books.
It's funny, Rob, that you mentioned the children not wanting to talk down to children or treat them as if they don't have an understanding. So one of the things I took away from Dauphine is that the tone, the voice that the protagonist has, or from the point of view of the narration, is very adult, which I thought was surprising, because when I was reading it, I'm like, this doesn't feel like a YA book, but at the same time, like, I think that cerebral voice was necessary, and I don't know why. What are your thoughts on when you decided to write that voice?
Well, I wrote it in a retrospective way, like she was a young adult in her late teens and she was looking at everything that had happened to her. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I would do that exactly the same way if I were doing it now. If I woke up tomorrow and Dauphine didn't exist as a published book, I might try writing it from the present tense, but also, like I said, it's no longer the story that is burning a hole through my brain, So at some point you do have to just let it go. They say books are never finished, just abandoned.
Yeah,
but it is retrospective, and that's something that people argue about in regards to YA literature. I don't personally care about the hard and fast genre rules all that much. The really important thing to me was not to talk down on my readers.
Right.
We had on the creators of a doom metal RPG recently, and one of my favorite takeaways was them basically saying fuck the rules to just about everything. So like I find that the irreverence towards genre lines is becoming a thing that is like, why do we have these in the first place is often what gets asked. So I really admire that type of spirit when it comes to stuff like that. Because, fuck the rules. If you want to learn something from a cookbook, by all means, who cares? All right, Deb, I think this is just about the time where we're going to pivot into the world building jam. Now, for those of you who don't know how this works, we're going to roll some dice to figure out the genre, whether it be between science fiction, fantasy, horror, modern day, romance, or a combination of the two. Then we're going to roll the subject, whether it be an item, a monster, a place, a historical figure, an event, or again, combining two of them. Then we're going to figure out the theme, whether it be between madness, sacrifice, love, metamorphosis, pride and honor, the unspeakable, triumph, and hope. Then once all that's done, we're going to create a scenario based around those dice rolls. And then after all that, we're going to roll a d20 and just throw in a twist to fuck it all up. So let's go ahead and get this started. First up is the genre. That's going to be science fiction. All right. Next up, we have the subject. Oh, that's a roll 2 and combine. So let's see what we get here. We have a monster and historical figure. All right.
Ooh.
Do not say it.
That's weird.
All right. Next, we have the theme, and that theme is pride and honor.
Ooh.
All right. So, Deb, you are our honored guest. With all that in mind, we have a science fiction genre with a monster and historical figure with the theme of pride and honor. So why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Well, my first question, is the monster the historical figure, or is that up to us?
It's entirely up to us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to have, I don't know, like Abraham Lincoln, America's first Bigfoot, you have that option. You have all sorts of different options, but remember that we're also in a science fiction genre, so maybe it's Abraham Lincoln, the world's first Bigfoot astronaut. You know, who knows?
Monster created in a lab.
Hey, there we go. All right, I like where we're going already.
Cloned Bigfoot Abraham. No, I don't want.
Okay, who's the historical figure?
Well, you can make that up. Essentially, you can make the monster and historical figure just because it's the first to do this, or it's, maybe it's, for example, right? Frankenstein's monster would be an historical figure if it was introduced into the modern world because it's the first, patchwork man, so to speak.
Sure. Well, but in that case, all monsters are historical figures then, right?
Not necessarily. You can have some generic-ass vampires, for sure.
Because if you're in a world where monsters are commonplace, then...
Yes, exactly.
Sure. Okay.
What makes a troll different from a historical troll, I suppose, is the question that we're really asking here.
One has a top hat.
Maybe the lab-created monster becomes a celebrity or a politician?
Oh, yes. I'm loving that.
We're talking about pride and honor.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm loving that direction so far. All right, cool.
Celebrity or politician? Which one? I'm into celebrity.
I'm actually thinking like influencer when it comes to celebrity.
Oh, like Instagram?
Oh, yeah, something like that, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I made it a lab.
Okay, so then what's the monster selling or trying to sell? Or are they just a model?
Are they like the quote unquote genetically perfect being and you can, get gene therapy to look like them? Are they a literal poster child of gene therapy?
I like that.
Do they even exist? Because if people are only seeing them on Instagram, then maybe it's
it could be like the hologram singers.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking that
clones grown in a lab that only last so long.
That's actually kind of what I was thinking. There's like a particular shelf life, or like a Logan's Run where you look down and there's like a crystal blinking. And it's like, oh, you're 20. Oh, guess what? Your time is up. You got to go. You're no longer influential. Sorry. That kind of thing.
20, huh?
Well, I mean, look, I truly believe that in social media, you stop being relevant once you hit 21. So that's why I'm not on social media.
I'm still hip. I'm cool.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm lit. Don't you know? Yeah. Anyway,
TikTok instead of Instagram, because I don't understand TikTok.
TikTok is basically Vine, but with more Chinese like spy technology based in.
I don't even know.
And younger, like
yes,
Vine,
demonstrably younger
for adolescents.
Oh,
imagine shorter YouTube clips that you can quickly upload.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that we have a TikTok star or whatever future equivalent of TikTok is. And they are lab grown. They're the first monster that is a celebrity, and they have a timestamp basically. So is this one monster, or is it multiple monsters, or actually is it the same monster who is essentially reborn over and over again in a younger body each time?
Ooh, what if they made one monster and thought they were a success and then made a bunch of others, and then the first one started showing signs of deterioration. Like it's a little flowers for Algernon, but
I like it.
I actually like that. Yeah, I like that a lot because it's a matter of, I mean, we can talk about the consumptive nature of social media in general. I like that a lot. Cool.
Is that monster still around and maybe like blowing the lid on this whole operation?
Well, I think what we need to do is roll some dice and see what the twist is, and then we can kind of go from there.
I can also see it kind of be where they don't tell them that they have this like time limit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be a very like depressing train of where you're just like, oh, I thought I had my whole life in front of me and this is all I've done.
And they're like, no, you're only bred to be 13 to 21. And then actually that's like a body horror movie when it's telling it from the perspective of that influencer who doesn't know what's happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Fake memories and everything.
Oh, it reminds me a little of the movie Moon, which I love.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
That's a great movie.
That's such a good movie.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go ahead and roll the twist die and see what happens. So I'm going to roll a die.
Everything you know is a lie. Come on.
Oh no. We have to roll another theme and then mix it in. So let's see what we get for another theme.
Okay.
No, because each twist is unique, Daniel. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a twist.
Every day I'm stunned by this.
All right, so let's see what we get for our new theme. Love. Perfect. Let's throw in some love. How do we add in some love to this TikTok influencer's life, even with a short shelf life?
Also, what's the pride and honor exactly? Like, pride, social media. That could be explained pretty easily.
Yeah, I feel like social media. Honor, that's nebulous enough. We can focus more on the pride aspect of that theme as opposed to honor. But if you want to get into honor and love, we more than happy to.
Falling in love with the same person through each iteration of your creation.
Oh, that's honorable.
So it's always the same character then? Just recycled, or are there a bunch of them?
It's always a different like aspect or a different character, but he always seems to fall in love with the same person, and that person has this weird feeling of where do I stop interacting with them because I just know it's going to end.
So one person knows that you're actually dating the same person over and over again, but that person thinks that he's falling in love with multiple people
for the first time
over and over again.
Yep.
I feel like there's some really cool stories, especially because I imagine that with the TikTok influencer, it's not going to be the same age or gender or even nationality each time. So we can kind of switch around what that might look like. And you can explore what love actually is through this kind of weird TikTok medium.
It could be a series of short stories, like told from different angles in that way.
Do they only communicate through TikTok?
That could be possible. Maybe it's a weird parasocial relationship that questions what love actually is, you know, whether it be a real kind or what type of love, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic love, right? Mm-hmm. You can fall in love with someone in a kind of brotherly or paternal or maternal way, and that could change each iteration.
Yeah. I also wonder if the person's grown in a lab and they always fall in love with the same person. Could that be related to their genetic code?
Oh, you're asking.
And then who's the designer? Yeah, that implies a designer too.
Yeah.
So wait, this entire creature is actually a love letter from the geneticist.
Oh, that's super creepy.
It's the geneticist himself.
Oh God. Yeah, no, like you're the geneticist and you're programming your creatures to love certain aspects of yourself.
Yeah,
that is horrifying. Oh, horrible. We chose sci-fi, not horror, Daniel. Jeez.
I thought we just talked about how genres didn't have to be so.
In writing, not in the Worldbuild jam. Damn
it. Science fiction can be pretty horrifying.
Oh, yeah, I'm joking, but my God, yeah, absolutely. All right. So I feel like we're at a good point with our weird vat-grown TikTok monster.
But not
Which,
clockwork.
yeah, no,
Could
not
be. If you
clockwork.
want to do a steampunk version.
Oh God.
Steampunk TikTok.
Yeah,
Get
God
it?
damn it.
TikTok, get it?
Yeah, that's what I was going for.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. We're
Rob,
moving on to the rapid fire
Rob,
questions.
do you get it?
We're moving on.
Deb gets it.
All right, Deb, thank you so much. And now comes the rapid fire questions. You might already expect some of these questions, but my wife really wants to know, is soup a cereal?
Is soup a cereal?
Yeah.
I
Normally I ask,
don't
is
think
cereal
so.
a soup? Okay.
No.
Okay, so cereal is not a soup.
I mean, I guess you could make it a soup if you like mushed it all into liquid and then heated it up, but no, for the sake of, I don't know.
All right.
That's one
No,
more.
I
on
don't
our
think
time.
cereal is a soup.
Wow. All right.
Winning.
Next up, what games have you been playing as of late?
Oh gosh, well that's a great question. When the pandemic started, my wife and I decided that we would play all the board games in our house, and we have more than I think either of us ever realized. We still haven't made it to all of them, but let's see. I do love the card game Set, and earlier this pandemic, I replayed some of the Kingdom Rush games, which I love. It's great tower defense. And now I'm playing Bloons game.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you a fan?
I have sank so many hours into Balloons, yes.
It's the Adventure Time version.
Oh, that sounds even better. Don't you tempt me with an Adventure Time Balloons game.
It's free too.
I'm moving soon. I can't do this.
Just have it shipped to your new address.
Oh my god.
You know what I love is playing games while I'm listening to audiobooks. Double
great.
content, you know?
That's actually a great and efficient way to do it. Absolutely. Speaking of audiobooks, who is someone you'd like to shout out who's not yourself?
Ooh, well, my wife, Kelsey, who's also my best friend, Kelsey Jannerson, of course, and my friend, Ash Van Otterloo, their book just came out with Scholastic a week or two ago, and it's called Cattywampus. It's a middle grade novel, and so I'm really happy for them.
Excellent, excellent. That concludes my proportion. Daniel, go ahead.
My rapid fire questions for you are: first, what is your favorite Halloween movie?
Wow. Okay. Well, I love horror movies. I think my very favorite is Ginger Snaps.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yes. Such an underrated movie. Absolutely.
Okay, and then on the same note, if you had unlimited funds, what Halloween costume would you make?
Oh gosh. Well, right now it would have to be something with a dome or a bubble around it, right?
Obviously.
So let's see.
Air conditioning.
I'm trying to think of what that could be, besides like a hamster, which is not that great.
A rocking hamster.
Oh, you could be Sandy Cheeks from SpongeBob, full with the dome inside and everything.
Could be.
Suit.
I think actually this year though, my wife and I are just both going to be wearing full body Spider-Man suits, or like Venom and Spider-Gwen or something.
Nice.
But like the ultimate Halloween costume, well, last year I dressed as a Gelfling from the Dark Crystal,
Nice.
as did my wife. And our costumes, we put them together ourselves. They were pretty good. But I've always thought that if I had a ton of money, I would spend it on like a very accurate costume.
You can build the Skeksis to follow you around.
Yeah, I was thinking like you need Skeksis to follow that up. Yeah.
Could get my cat a little Fizzgig suit,
Yes. Oh my god, that's perfect.
I always liked the theme, like having a group theme. I always loved the idea of doing like, hey, we're all going as David Bowie from different phases of David Bowie's life, right? Or
Yeah.
like, hey, we're going to be Daniel Day-Lewis from all of his different roles, like stuff like that I've always found really fun.
Group costumes.
Yeah,
Group
I'm really
costumes,
glad I
yeah.
found I'm really glad I found someone who likes doing couples costumes, because when I was younger, I was never able to talk anyone into doing the group costumes with me.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah. Well, luckily no one has fun this year because of the COVID, so it's fine.
Luckily, we have fun at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Party at home, y'all.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So, any other Chris? Do you have any questions for Deb?
Well, I actually was wondering, what are you currently working on?
Well,
Ooh.
I am currently querying a manuscript that's a dark contemporary YA novel in verse. So a novel written as prose poetry, sort of drawing from different parts of my own history as a writer there. And it is about depression in college and repressed memories and dealing with trauma again. But I am really proud of this book, and I'm hoping to find representation for it. I'm also working on a short story that is an adult horror story about a roadside attraction in Arizona.
That sounds
Any in particular that you want to put on blast, or is it just a fictional one?
It's a real one. It's called The Thing. It's in Dragoon, Arizona. If you drive all the way through Arizona, you will see it, and not much else around it. But yeah, it is a little museum attached to a gas station that has all these little oddities, old cars, sculptures, old furniture, and then at the very end is The Thing, and they won't tell you what it is unless you pay to go all the way through it. And it is what appears to be the remains of a mummy, although no one's really sure where it came from.
That's so
interesting.
weird.
Right.
That's so cool. All right, Deb, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. It's been a real blast having you on. Why don't you go ahead and tell us where we can find you and your work?
Absolutely. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Deb Jannerson, or at the website debjannerson.com. When I have new pieces in literary journals or online, I try to always post links there. You can also find out more about the 3 books that I already have out, as well as my current project.
Awesome. Deb, thank you again for coming on.
You're welcome.
Well, that was a great interview.
Yeah, I actually agree with that, because I really love being able to talk craft with anyone. I love being able to talk YA. Like, as someone who's less familiar with that subgenre, being able to talk to people who are in it more than I am is, like, I always like to learn.
It's also really fun to hear from a creator of something that you actually consumed, to get the secret insights. And granted, they wrote their book quite a while ago, but even so, the insights I think are still fresh.
Absolutely. And I mean, the process doesn't really change. The process and again, I just enjoy listening to people's processes because they're always so different. Plus, there's always one of my most fascinating subjects is being able to listen to how geography kind of takes place and how it changes their writing style and what they write about. And
Exactly.
I'm always fascinated by that. Nolans in particular is a fascinating place to me.
A spooky place.
I mean, it's got so much history. It's like a melange of so many different like cultural aspects and everything like that. I find that to be really interesting. As someone who's never been there, it has a sense of mystery and intrigue to me that is, it's a cool city. I don't know. I don't know. I guess that'll just about wrap it up for this episode of Worldbuild with us. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. We'll see you next week.